bei 25.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 with an idea of maybe working as a bartender on a beach, but instead ended up teaching English to third graders. Thankfully, I was still able to bartend for myself at home.
I'm sure.
Big step down.
And I met Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 24 years ago. Fell in love with taking years to finally have Thailand totally figured out, only to find out the next day that I know absolutely nothing. So I never left.
Which philosopher said that? The only true smart man is the person who knows he knows nothing, or something like that?
I believe that was Socrates.
Ah, yes, that young knave. I've heard of him before.
Thailand is weird in this respect. That I mean, this is kind of why we do the podcast, but I do reach these stages where I feel like, wow, I finally understand this place. And then, something happens the next day and I'll be like, what? Like the Thai government did what? Or this Thai person did what?
Keeps you on your toes.
That's right. All right, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind the scenes photos of our interviews, a heads up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. Best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about my further adventures on Facebook Marketplace dealing with some scams, some music recommendations for those who like traditional Thai chill-out music playing in the background, and Greg's excitement over finally getting AIS to install fiber internet in his condo building, despite it first being available over 10 years ago. Better late than never, as they say. To learn how to become a patron and get all this good stuff, plus full access to over 700 bonus and regular back episodes, click the support button at the top of our website.
Can't wait to surf the information superhighway. Sorry, I should say.
I only got it 5 years ago, dude.
Well, yeah, still feel really behind the curve. Can't wait for all the new surfing I'll be able to do.
Excited.
Yeah. Also, don't forget, if you listen to us on Spotify, you can now hear all of our bonus shows there as well. If you're a patron, simply link your Patreon account to your Spotify account, add our new feed titled Bangkok Podcast Badass Patrons Only to hear the regular and bonus shows in the same place. Alrighty then. Well, in this episode, we are going to dive deep into the psyche of the average Thai university student from the POV of an esteemed educator, in this case, Ed.
Thank you.
You are esteemed. Now, for those who don't know, Ed's main gig is explaining American and Western culture to his students, which seems pretty straightforward to anyone from those countries or cultures, but it's actually quite the opposite. For instance, most of us try to learn about Thailand by taking what we know about our culture and adapting it into Thailand. But for Ed, it's the opposite. He's got to take Western culture and view it through the lens of Thai culture, which can be quite a challenge and a little bit disorienting. Even simple things like volunteering an answer to a question or disagreeing with someone older than you are hard to explain when your native cultural identity frowns upon those things. Not only that, but many of his students will soon head into the U.S. for work, so Ed also tries to prepare them for the inevitable culture shock. So we thought it'd be fun to talk about how you distill this issue in a way that barely out of their teens Thai people would understand, and what types of questions they ask as they grapple with these issues. I can't even imagine what this must be like, man, just trying to explain something as insane as
the United States.
As the United
Insane
States.
as the United States. Two times.
And I'm not even American, so I mean, I'm close enough to understand it, but you must have just a special relationship with it.
Well, Canadians are looking over the fence going, what in the hell is going on down there?
We're building that ice wall real quick, man. Game of Thrones
That's
style.
great. Well, it is kind of interesting where I've ended up because obviously I was in Thailand for a long time before I started doing the podcast. And so I've had this problem of explaining the United States to Thai students for a long time. You know, my job. It's literally my career.
Right.
And I think part of the reason I liked or stayed doing the podcast is that it's basically the inverse. So I feel like I'm in between. So when we do this, you and I are trying to explain like the tiny amount of wisdom we've managed to pull together to other people. But it's kind of the inverse. So it's like, in a way, I like it now. I feel like I'm in between both cultures.
Right.
So, obviously I teach a lot of different classes and it's academic. So I don't want to talk about that stuff. Instead, I want to talk about more kind of practical things I tell my students so they're prepared. A lot of my students do, work, travel stuff over the summer, where they go work like in a hotel or an amusement park in the States, and then they get like 2 weeks to travel. They do that kind of stuff over the summer. Right. So they might study their freshman year British and American studies, and then they go to the States for 2.5 months. So a lot of them are, going fairly quickly. And then of course there's a larger issue that a lot of them would like to get master's degrees either in the States or Britain, or work for international companies. So, my program is designed to prepare ties for like the international world, to interact with people from around the world speaking English. And most of the international world is fairly westernized, depending on, who you go to work for. So I'm going to start with just 3 very practical things that I always try to tell my students, just so they're ready, even if they're taking a holiday in the States. The first thing I remind them is, compared to Thailand, the United States is gigantic. So all of Thailand, from top to bottom, almost fits inside of Texas. Doesn't quite fit, but the whole country basically fits inside of one state. And obviously Texas is a pretty big state, but the United States is just an enormous country compared to Thailand. And Thailand's not even that small. It's just the United States is huge. And I like to point out to them that it's not just that it's geographically huge, it's that it's very diverse. So we have many different regions. The East Coast is not the same as the Midwest, is not the same as the South. And New Orleans is not the same as the rest of the South. And the West Coast is different. And like the Great West, like Montana, Wyoming, that's a different planet.
Right.
When I drove through, I took I've driven across the country several times. And when I first drove through, those states like Montana, Wyoming, you really feel like you're on another planet. Mm-hmm. I went to the Black Hills, which I went in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit weird because of the size and diversity. The U.S. is actually a little bit hard to generalize about. I mean, so it's kind of my job to teach American culture, but actually, American culture is very diverse. My students, some of my students have been exchange students in high school for either a semester or a year. Okay, and they have very different experiences. Like some of them they're like an exchange student in Houston. Wow. Or they're an exchange student in a small town in upstate New York.
So even if those 2 students got together, hey, what was your experience? What can you tell me about life in Houston? Like nothing you could use.
Yeah, upstate New York is freezing cold. Like so, if they're in Houston, right. in the city or close to the city, they didn't experience any cold weather. Right. It's gonna be mostly it's gonna be totally different racial mix. Some of my students end up actually. I think this is a little bit of a scam, but a lot of families that accept exchange students are hardcore conservative Christians. To me, it's a little bit sketchy. Right. But they're more likely to bring foreign students in from Asia, and it's a little bit of a proselyte. They're proselytizing a little bit.
Reverse missionaries.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's a good point. Reverse missionaries. It sounds like a sex position, though, but that's not what he meant. That's not.
You come to me, and I'll brainwash you.
But so they have wildly different experiences, and so I always want to tell them, like, if a student has a negative experience, I'm always like, hey, that's just that one place you're at. Like you were in the South, or you were here, and I do. And when I go back, this is something that strikes me. That the U.S. is different. Thailand does have some diversity. It does. We talked about it when we did our show with Phil.
Sure.
It does. but I do think it's less. You know, it's not the same. So we have regionalism, and then of course we do have the urban-rural thing, which Thai students tend to already understand. So American cities are totally different from the American countryside, and that's actually totally different from the suburbs.
Right.
It's
right.
completely different life.
Yeah. When I first came here, I remember I was on a trip with some Brits, and I think I mentioned this on the show before, but one of them asked me how long it takes to travel across Canada on a train. And I didn't even have an answer. I was like, I don't know, like a week?
Right, yeah.
Like they
4 days?
They're like, what? And I was like, well, first of all, why would you even do that? They couldn't comprehend it, you know?
Yeah, when I told my students I drove across the U.S. and it took 3.5 days, they were, because they don't, again, this is why I point this out. It's like, this is kind of like just basic facts you have to understand about the U.S., like just American Studies 101. Number one, it's huge and diverse, and it's actually difficult to generalize about because of that, I think.
It's kind of when you explain, like, living in Europe to an American. You say, like, oh, I drove half an hour and I crossed through 3 different countries. You're like,
that's right.
What? What?
Yeah. I mean, Europe is certainly more diverse because of the languages and culture, but it is a little bit like that, you know. I mean, some states, I guess you could say, are similar, but man, it's just not the same when you're traveling.
Right.
The second thing, which is really important, and again, practical advice, is I warn my students about violent crime. Now, this is tricky because in general, I think the odds you'll experience violent crime are low. So I do think I would actually just generally say America is a safe country. It's not like going to, you know, I guess didn't we just talk about South Africa, or, you know, it's not, it's not, you're very unlikely to get kidnapped in the U.S., you know, for ransom, you know, so I do think the U.S. is a safe country, but the problem is, depending on where you are, like neighborhood wise, or in this city or on this street at the wrong time, it can be very unsafe. So I always tell my students, at night, be very careful where you go and make sure you talk to an American or your concierge or your cousin, and don't just go wandering, you know, because I wander around Bangkok at night, late at night, with my expensive camera, fearlessly, because I've lived here a long time. I would never do that in Cleveland. Never. It would be insane.
Do you ever get any questions about this, like school shootings, mall shootings?
Yeah, no, we talked about it in a couple classes. Yeah, no, the whole, yeah.
Are your students scared, or has it ever turned any of them off?
Yes. It's funny you brought that up, because after Trump got shot, you know, in the ear or whatever, a student came up to me and said, Ajarn, I used to want to go to the States. I don't think I want to go anymore. She's like,
really?
It's crazy. She said something like, I think she said, it's crazy over there. And I was like, well, kind of, you know, this is the general point. So it's a tricky thing to get right. I think the U.S. is generally a safe country, but you have to pay attention to where you go when. So you can't turn your mind off and just wander, especially at night, especially in big cities. I mean, there's still crime in rural areas, but especially in big cities. And then the third thing that I just repeat over and over again is how expensive medical care is, and that you should not step one foot in the U.S. without good health insurance. And I think most people know this. And I've seen shows about I think this was kind of during the fight over Obamacare, and I remember seeing a documentary about Canadians coming to the U.S. and a couple of them getting burned. You know, it's like they don't know. Like they go to the U.S. and they think it's like Canada.
What dumbasses.
Yeah, and then they get injured, and it's like $250,000. It's like their life savings.
Yeah,
you know. So I think most students know this, and most travel companies. But man, if you are in the States without any kind of health insurance and you get injured, you are in for a shock.
Yeah, up shit creek, as they say.
Yeah,
S-O-L.
for real. Yeah,
yeah.
You know, and then I'll give practical advice like that, but then I'll tie that in with more academic issues like why. So why is the U.S. different from Canada or Denmark or Sweden? You know, that's another topic.
Yeah.
So that's the practical stuff, and then even though I don't teach culture, I'm not a culture guy. It just comes up. It's tangential to a lot of other stuff I teach. And it is also kind of practical advice. So one thing I stress is that the United States has a very legalistic culture. This is something that it blows my mind when I go back home. I'm an American lawyer. I was a lawyer for 5 years before I bailed. And when I go back home and I'm just flipping through the 500 channels on my sister's TV,
right.
I can't believe how many law shows there are. Like there's so many, there's shows about judges, lawyers, cops, like CSI, FBI. And then you flip over to the news and it's the Supreme Court today announced this,
Interesting.
We just have a legalistic culture. And this ties into, why I say on the show that I'm a rule of law guy, because I'm American and I'm an American lawyer. And Thais do not think that way. They're not used to all laws being enforced. I mean, even in the U.S., not all laws are being enforced, but they're just used to like general flexibility about rules.
Right,
and they're used to, and they're used to, I'll just say it, they're used to being able to bribe their way out of a lot of stuff. And so, I always, when I, because I teach an introduction to law class to freshmen, I always tell them, like, if you are in the United States, do not try to bribe a police officer. It's like, I mean, it's so basic, but that's the problem with young people. It's like it's that little piece of knowledge that like they missed, so
right.
I want to, or like the Canadians who missed the fact that they should already know this about the U.S., but they just missed this fact.
Well, it reminds me of years ago. I was out with a Thai friend, and we saw some liquid on a floor in a supermarket, in a grocery store, and I made a joke about like, oh God, if you slipped, too bad. If we're not in the U.S., we could sue them and retire. And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, in Western countries, especially America, like you could.
That's right, for sure.
Slip on this milk, you sue the store, and they're like, why? And I was like, well, it's the store's responsibility to clean it up. And they said, well, yeah, but you slipped in it. You're dumb enough to slip in it.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not my responsibility to keep the store. And then we get back and forth, and they were like, it's a stupid system.
It's a very good example. I mean, this has just become more when I go back there, it becomes very apparent to me.
Right.
Even watching American football, it stops every 45 seconds with either a flag or a rule. American football is way more legalistic than soccer or international football. It's it's crazy. It's just part of our culture. And the U.S. And I will stick by this. The U.S. has low corruption. We do have corruption, and anytime there's even like a whiff of it, it's a huge story. But the bottom line is, you can't bribe people. It's just not part of our culture. I mean, there's just very rare exceptions, and this is important for foreigners. Foreigners have to know that.
Yeah, I think you can do it. You can't do it on small levels, like for your average person, bribery is not really something that happens. But you can do it if you're dealing in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Only the rich are the ones allowed to. They can bribe Congress and change the law. Yeah. No doubt about that. A couple other things are almost the inverse of what we learned living here. So I try to point out, the basic facts about Western culture, that it's really based on the individual and not the group. And in general, individuals are trying to stand out and be special as opposed to fit in. And it's a tricky thing because all of us want to fit in to some extent. We want to have friends, but the West places much more of an emphasis on being your own person, being an individual, having your own opinions. And, I've talked before about, one of my biggest problems with my students is that they just don't have their own opinions. Right. No one ever taught them how to have their own opinions. And when I have exchange students, for example, right now I've got several French exchange students, same age as my Thai students, and they just talk. That's the difference. Like they just raise their hand and say, "What about this?" Or "I read this," or "What do you think about this?" They just talk. It's like they have their own opinions, their own thoughts. And part of my program, one of the goals of our program is I'm trying to turn Thai students into Western students. I mean, it's just. That's what we're trying to do. So we're not just teaching about the West. We're honestly trying to Westernize our students. And that's a stated goal. So, I mean, it's not a trick. It's not brainwashing. We're trying to prepare Thai students to interface with Westerners in either an academic setting or professional setting. So I'm trying to tell them, like, you have to be able to participate. Your boss is going to You know,
Right,
your
right.
boss at a meeting is going to say, Greg, what do you think? And you're like ties are not ready for that.
Yeah, this goes back to the very first thing I always used to teach my high school students back in the day when I was a teacher was the handshake, and I would line them all up and make them shake my hand and introduce themselves, and then I would get up and inevitably say that was terrible. Only two of you had good handshakes, and I would turn it into like a funny lesson. But
Right.
that's what I said. If you meet a foreigner, especially a Westerner, squeeze that hand, give it 2 solid pumps, and make eye contact. That goes a long way.
It's
So
funny.
little
That's
things
good
like
advice. I mean, I haven't done that specifically, but it's funny you mentioned that because I talk about the handshake as kind of a symbol of Western equality,
that.
as opposed to a bow. Like when you bow, you're putting yourself beneath someone, but a handshake is kind of like a image of equality, and it's kind of tough to get right because obviously back home we are aware of seniority and we don't treat everyone exactly the same. I mean, you know, you're in a company and you learn, oh, this guy's been around forever. This guy invented that, or that guy's like the top dog. And so we don't treat everyone exactly the same. That's ridiculous.
No.
But you are expected to compete, and you can't kind of. I think something happens in Thai culture where when you're younger, you just have to show up and pay attention. So you're not actually doing nothing. So for young Thai people, they think their job is to show up and have a good attitude and pay attention and learn. Because someday they're going to be the oldest person, you know. But that's just not the way the West works. And I remember a story of one of my. This was actually quite a long time ago, but one of my students did an exchange program in Sweden, and she said that she was. It wasn't an exchange program. It was like a summer job or internship thing where she actually went to Sweden. And it's exactly what I said before. Like the boss, like asked what she thought.
Oh.
And about something. And she said she didn't, it wasn't just that she didn't have anything to say. It was that she didn't understand why they were asking her.
Interesting.
You know, she said like, I'm only 21. Like, why? Why do they want to know what I think? And that just shows you the different mindsets. And it's like, the bottom line is like older people, you know, in the West, we know that we're clueless and we're out of touch. So like, we're like, please, 19-year-olds, straighten me out. You know,
yeah,
like,
right,
it's
right,
like you,
right.
it's like you talking to your son, like because you know, you're losing it. Like
Yeah.
he's locked in. He's locked into all this stuff that you completely missed, you know?
We believe the children are our future. But this ties in with what I was saying on the last week's show about how respect is overrated here, because, you know, just because it's really hard for Thais to sort of grok the idea that they can earn respect from an older person, even if they're way younger, by how they act and how they present themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I do sometimes talk about the high context, low context thing, which for me was a huge light bulb in understanding Thai culture. So I just assume that since it was huge for me, it might be huge for them. And listeners, most of you guys probably heard this already, but the basic idea is that Asian culture, Thai culture, is very high context, which means Thai people are used to gathering a lot of information from social context, and not everything needs to be spelled out in words. They figure stuff out, and a lot of stuff is left unspoken. But the West is not like that. Like, this ties in with the fact that we're a legalistic culture. Basically, what you say and what other people say, it matters way more than it does here. Like here, you can say one thing, but everyone understands you mean something completely different, and there's no problem with that. But there's no problem whatsoever.
Maddening.
Everyone completely understands that you mean the opposite of what you said. But that's just not how the West works. And so I warn my students that that they should really be focusing on the words, and that if they don't understand something, they should ask. And to verbalize. Like, I think we're just a verbal culture, and they should verbalize. And I was really happy because a bunch of my students do internships after their junior year. And before they go, so there's some of them are working at the U.S. Embassy, international companies. And before they start, I give them like a little brief. And I tell them, if you don't understand what's going on, do not sit there and smile. Do not do that. Like, as soon as you feel lost, like, raise your hand or say, excuse me, and ask. And I tell them, at the end of the summer, I'm going to ask your boss if you asked questions or not. If you were
nice.
if you were straightforward about what you didn't know.
Mm.
Because my students in class, they always tell me they understand everything, and then the exams are horrible. I'm just
Right.
like, there's nothing wrong with saying you don't understand something. That's why we're here. But they just like to, it's the my pen ride. It's the everything fine problem. Oh, everything's fine.
Right.
Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But
where do you want to go for dinner? Up to you. No, I want you to tell me where we go for dinner.
Right. What else do I got? The other thing is, I think that's, okay. You know how people say that Thai people are shy? This is a tricky thing. And the way our buddy John puts it, I think he put it well, is that Americans are, and I'm guessing Canadians, I'm not sure, but Americans are much quicker to engage you than Thai people are. So and this is obviously tough because I don't know what it's like to be a Thai person in Thailand. Like, obviously they're going to engage each other more than they engage foreigners. But it's just, since he put it that way, when I'm back, it's kind of night and day, where it's just, I'll be walking towards someone in Walmart, and as we approach each other, the person will just say something, and I'll say something back, and then we're having like a reasonably deep conversation. And I know there's like a language issue here, but I do think it's a cultural thing. I think Thai people, they tend to just leave people alone. I think they tend to mind their own business. I really think this is right. I don't think it's only language. I really don't. I just talk about this idea of, engaging people. And again, I think this ties back into like the verbal culture, the low context way we approach things, that we want things to be clarified in words.
Right. That's a really good one. We got to find like a social scientist or a psychologist on here to talk about that in more detail. I'm really interested in learning more about that.
Well, I am a social scientist, or at least I play one on TV, but basically only when it comes to politics. And so really what I do is like political ideology, that kind of stuff. But
right.
this culture stuff for me is kind of a hobby because, I do it on the podcast, and then I'm essentially doing kind of the inverse with Thai students. And, after 4 years, my students are different. I mean, not every single one of them, but it's definitely a difference. When I read the exams of my juniors and seniors, they're totally different.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Than freshmen. And at least some students, not all, but some students, when I see them at graduation, it's just, they're different. I mean, I know it's weird to say that I'm westernizing them, and it's not a value judgment. It's not saying, hey, everyone should be westernized. That's not the point. The point is, it's just our mission to prepare them to interface with Westerners. It's just, that's what we do.
Right.
So it's just the same thing we do here. Is if Westerners are coming to Thailand, we give them advice about, okay, here's how to survive in Thailand. Here's how to figure things out. Here's how to understand what's going on.
I got two questions about what your perspective on this. So the first one is, why do most of your students want to go to the U.S. versus like Brazil or the UK or Australia? Like, what specifically about the U.S. do the ones going there cite as their reason for wanting to go there?
That's a good question. I mean, my program is British American Studies, and there's definitely a mix. Like, some students really are interested in Britain more than the U.S.
Yeah.
And obviously British stuff sometimes comes up in some of my classes. It just, we've got other British Ajarns who teach that stuff. And it's funny. I'm not sure, when I interview students who are applying to the program, and I ask them a question exactly like this, why do you want to go to Britain or America instead of China or wherever? And they almost always just say something fairly obvious, like, well, Britain and America are powerful, or Britain and America are strong countries. And so it's not
pretty uninspiring answer.
Yeah, it's not some super sophisticated thing. A lot of them, it's not necessarily that but most of them would, at the minimum, would like to travel there. So if there would be almost no student who would say, oh, I never want to go. So at the very least, they would love to travel and be able to go. But a bunch of them want to study, get like a master's degree.
Right.
And then some of them do aspire to live there. So I've always thought it was a little bit weird, to be honest. But so maybe 10% of the students, they basically want to be American or British. Like they're like, I'm out of here. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So there's actually not that many of those, where they want to leave Thailand and at least think they're not going to come back. There's not that many.
The second question I want to ask is, and this is something that only occurred to me recently, and I was thinking about it, and there doesn't seem to be a Thai equivalent to quote unquote the American dream, where anyone can make it. Anyone, if you just work hard and try and have a few breaks, you can become, super successful. And that's something that's, as Westerners, that's instilled, deep down. You work hard, you try your best, and you'll be a success. In Thailand, it sort of seems more like, you work hard and you support your family and you'll be happy. But people sort of seem to be stuck in the same sort of like socioeconomical scale, roughly.
I mean, I do talk about the idea of the American dream in class and whether America really is the land of opportunity. I do think what you're saying is true. This is actually something I didn't have in my notes, but it just triggered something. I do talk about how I do think the West, and I think this comes from, I mean, you're an ancient Rome guy. I'm a little bit more of an ancient Greece guy.
Right.
But I think it comes from Greece and Rome. This emphasis on achievement. Like you're nobody unless you do something great. I mean, part of it is individualism, but it's also it's the desire to achieve something. And I think that, all human beings have this to some extent. And of course, the Chinese, invented stuff way before the West in many cases.
Right.
I just feel like there's something about Confucian culture, Buddhism, Thai culture, where a lot of times Thais get their identity from maybe their family or position in life. Yeah. And so they don't need to do anything. Like I think in the West it's a little bit dark, where a lot of times we feel like we're nothing until we achieve something. It's like, I'm nobody. I'm a loser. And I think, to be honest, I think Thais are healthier. Like their identity is, I'm the oldest child of my family. And they don't feel like anything's wrong with them. Like that's their role. That's their identity.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think Thais might be super Asians. They're like super Buddhist, whereas they're just kind of chill and they're kind of happy being their mother's daughter or being an older sister.
Right. There's a sentiment going around that I've seen a lot more of recently online, and it's people just sort of saying like, hey, by the way, what's wrong with just wanting enough money to pay my rent, enjoy my hobbies, and hang out with my friends? There's nothing wrong with that. I don't need to be climbing corporate ladders and whatever. I just want to be comfortable and happy. That's it. And I think a lot of Thais are like that. They're like, I'm happy working at my family's business, raising a family.
That's right.
That's it.
Anyway, it's for me. I have fallen in love with my job and then doing a little bit of the inverse on the podcast. I do feel I do feel
both worlds
because I wasn't joking during the intro, where I still feel like I just see stuff in Thailand that I would not have expected. I've been here 24 years now, and then a Thai person will do something or say something, or the Thai government, and I'll be like, really? Did they do that? Like, what does that mean? Where does that come from?
Right. That's funny. Well, that's good, man. And so just to finish up here, you said you noticed a difference between your new students and your graduated students, like your first year, fourth year.
For sure.
Do you notice even then a bigger difference with your students that come back from the U.S. after they've been there a few years? I imagine so, but what is it?
I mean, I don't get to interact with them too much, but there's definitely a difference. I might have mentioned this before in the show, but when I interview high school students to go to my program, I can tell immediately if they were exchange students in the States. So, I mean, usually they go for a year, and when they walk in the room, even when they're walking towards me, I'm like, okay, that person is not
just like, how they carry themselves.
I call them, Thai. Thai is like Thai students that have never left Thailand.
Uh-huh.
And when a student spends 2 semesters in an American high school, they're totally different. I mean, it's actually kind of shocking. And this is how I got interested in all this culture stuff. Culture matters. Like, I always say, like, I'm an idea guy. I don't care about culture. But man, it's like I've just learned, like, culture, it really matters. It's different. It changes people.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I have met some of your students, former students, who have been to the U.S. and have come back, and they are by all accounts.
We've had some on the show. We've had some on the show.
Yeah, they are by all accounts exceptionally cool and interesting and smart people. So good job, Ajarn Ed. You're doing your job well.
Thank you very much.
Nice. That's interesting. Alrighty then. Well, let's do something that we call Would You Rather, where one of us picks two contrasting situations tied to Thailand to debate and choose which one we'd prefer. And this week, Ed, I got a question for you.
All right, man. Hit me.
It's along these same lines, and it's kind of a gimme. I think I know which one you'd rather do, but seeing how things are progressing in the world these days, I wanted to hear what you had to say. So, say you were going back to school to get an advanced degree, and say that advanced degree was political science. Would you rather have your specialty focus on American politics in 2025 or Thai politics in 2025?
Ooh, I mean, this is literally up my alley.
Yeah.
We were just talking about before the show. It's right now, American politics are just so unbelievably frustrating.
Right.
But it's my job.
That's what I was thinking. Like, would you rather study Thai politics? They're both interesting. Would you rather study Thai politics and sort of have an easier go of it, or just sort of have your brain melt while you study American politics?
The bottom line, here's the honest to God truth. I've almost reached my limit of Thai politics. I'm sorry. I've almost reached my limit of American politics. So if I had a choice right now, I would study Thai politics.
Really?
Just for something different. It's I've been going deep on American politics for like a long time, and it's, I don't know, it's too much, and maybe it's also just the courses I teach. I don't really get a break from it.
Right.
So I'm just always have to know what's going on in the news. I teach both American government and international relations, so I got to be up on Russia and Ukraine and Gaza, and it's depressing and stressful. And I chose it, and I do like it, so it's, but even if you're doing what you love, you can get burned out.
Oh yeah, totally.
And, so I think I would choose Thai politics because I have way more to learn, and I still consider it kind of a black box. I mean, you and I tried to understand it. I've done a few shows, so I've got maybe more than the average expat, but I've been here much longer than the average expat. So I would choose to study Thai politics. It'd be hopefully a refreshing change.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking. It'd be like a nice break. Like you can downshift for a while and enjoy it.
It'd be like a new set of problems. Thank God, like a new set of a new nightmare.
That's funny. Slightly less existential nightmare.
That's right.
Yeah, that's funny.
Good question. Yeah. All right. A final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping in our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, BangkokPodcast.com on the web, or simply BangkokPodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
That's right. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. Send us a voicemail through the website that we'll feature on the show. Hit me up at Blue Sky, or on Blue Sky at BKK Greg. Thank you for listening, everyone. Take it easy out there. Stay calm, stay cool. We'll see you back here next week.
No doubt.